Okay, so right now, for those who are just joining us, welcome. Let me kind of give you an overview of what we're doing. We are engaging in apologetics, right? That is the rational defense of the faith. Remember, we learned that the word apologia means to give a defense from logic, right? That's where we get the word logia in the Greek. So we are making our defense. We are establishing our defense of our belief. And how we begin establishing our belief is by first establishing what's called theism. Theism, theos in the Greek. What word is this in the Greek?
God.
God, that's right. This is the word God. This is where we get the word theology, right? Theos, theo, means God. So when we look at the word theism, what does this mean? Theism is two words. Well, what does the mean? God. Comes from the word theos, right? What does ism mean? Ism means the belief in God. So when you put this together, theism is the belief in God. What are we showing in apologetics? Right now, where are we starting? We are starting to show that God, the Christian God, is the God that is the someone or something that has caused creation to exist. And so what we are doing is let's say to an atheist who doesn't believe in God, they are atheistic. We are theistic, right? We're establishing theism. We haven't gotten to the Christian God yet because we can't presuppose that yet. We can't state our conclusion unless we make our case, right? This is what we're doing. We're making our case not for Christ yet. What we're making our case for is the someone or something has to be theistic. And how are we doing that? We're doing that through what's called natural theology. That's what we covered last couple weeks. Natural theology, does anybody want to give a stab at it? Does anybody remember what natural theology is? What does theology mean? The knowledge and study of God, right? That's right. What does natural mean? It means creation. So natural theology is the knowledge of God that can be known about God by looking at creation. Just look at creation. And when you look at natural theology, it has three parts. This is what we've been covering. Last week we covered the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument said this, that when you look at creation, the cosmos, we see creation as what? An effect, right? And we know that based on the law of causality and the laws of contingency, we know that all creation as an effect is contingent. It depends on a causal power. You cannot have, remember the boiling water? You can't have boiling water, the effect, without what? A cause. It's impossible. All creation is contingent on a causal power. The law of causality says that every effect has to have a cause. Okay? That was the cosmological argument for the existence of something that caused creation. Now today, we're going to look at what's called the teleological argument. We're still within the realm of natural theology, okay? We're still within that realm. We're still establishing theism. We're still establishing that the something that exists, that created existence, has to be this. Okay? So what we're looking at today is the teleological argument, okay? Now, just as the cosmological argument argues from contingency and causality, we're going to see that the teleological argument argues from consonance and consistency. We're going to look over this here, okay? And again, what we're doing is showing that when you look at creation, when you look at everything, you can easily deduce, rationally deduce, it is far more reasonable to believe in theism than atheism. Okay? Questions on this so far? Before we get to anybody want to add anything? Okay. So let's look at the teleological argument. Now, here's what the teleological argument says, in the very bottom. It says that the order the complexity and the purpose directedness that is seen in the universe. It logically points to the existence of an intelligent designer, that the purposeful order and the consistent working order and the structures of the universe are best explained by the existence of an intelligent creator rather than coming into existence by chance. Okay? This is what the teleological argument says. This is what it states. In other words, here's what it says. Look at creation. Remember, we're looking at natural theology. Look at creation, okay? Take a peek at creation. In your minds, think of anything in creation. Doesn't matter what it is. Look at its complexity. Take anything. Look at its complexity within that creation. Look just how complex that design is and everything. But not only is it complex in its design, notice how it functions within that complexity. Let me give you an example, okay? Look at human DNA. Let's take DNA, for example. Is DNA non-complex or is it complex? Would anybody, atheists, would they disagree that DNA is complex? No. So we can start there. That is neutral ground, right? So when you look at human DNA, look at its structure, right? Look at the density of it. Look at the organization of it. Look at the function of it, of DNA. It is incredibly complex, okay? And here's the interesting part. When it comes to DNA, we have only begun to scratch the surface on understanding it. That's how complex it is. But again, not only in design is it complex, you understand that within that design, within the complexity of that design, DNA functions with a purpose. Does it not? Does DNA help to develop? This is going to be important. Does DNA help to develop, sustain, and reproduce life? Does DNA do anything else? Can DNA do anything else? No. It can't chop down a tree, right? It can't start a car. DNA has a specific function that it does intrinsic to itself, right? So you can see not only the complexity in its design, but you see the function, the consistent function within that complexity, do we not? Now the question is, here is the question that is posed in the teleological argument. When you look at the design, the complexity, and you look at the function within that complexity, is it more logical? Remember, we're arguing from logic, right? This is the basis, the foundation of our argument. Is it more reasonable to believe that all the complex designs, think of whatever you want to think of, the complexity of that design and the function in that complexity, is it more logical to believe that is a product of chance or the product of an intelligent designer? What is more logical? Let's start with that. What is more logical? Chance or an intelligent creator? And here's why I use the word chance. This is important because it is very, it's a very common belief, particularly in the scientific community or anybody that would deny theism. They believe that all these things happened as a product of chance. That chance is the causal power behind creation, behind the intelligent design, and behind the function of that intelligent design within that complexity. They argue that not only did DNA, for example, create itself, right, in some form or another, but by happenstance, by chance, that DNA happens to function in such a way that it does what it does to develop, sustain, and reproduce life. That's their argument. They use the word chance because they believe in atheism and self-creation, but they also believe that within that self-creation comes self-purpose, that it drives itself to its end goal. That's what they believe. So again, the question is who is right? Perhaps better stated, who is more logical, right? Who's more reasonable to believe that it's a product of chance, which we know there's no causal power in chance, right? What's chance? All chance is a mathematical statistic. So how can a mathematical statistic have a causal power to create? That in itself is illogical. right? But who's right? Who has the more logical position? Those who believe that chance created the purpose and it functions exactly the way it's supposed to? Or that there's an intelligent designer? This is the teleological argument, okay? Questions on that before we move on, because it's getting a little bit deeper here. Okay. So, telos in the Greek. Telos comes from the word end, or purpose, or goal. We were talking about this last night, Steve, okay? When Jesus says tetelestai, right? What does that mean? Remember he's on the cross, and he says tetelestai. What does that mean? It means it's finished. What's finished, though? The goal, the purpose, the design, right? That's what that means. So this word telos and the word teleological, it means purpose. It means goal-driven. It means the end is accomplished. So what we're arguing in the teleological argument is this. Look at the complex design. Look at DNA. Look at its complexity. Does it function with a purpose? Does it function with a goal? Yes, right? Does it not develop and sustain and reproduce life? So we're pointing to that. So how we do that is, we are showing in the teleological argument that creation has consonance. Consonance means harmony. Consonance means it is functioning together. The sum of the parts is the whole, right? This is what it's arguing. That everything in design is consonant with itself. Everything functions in harmony, in unity, to create, to develop, to sustain, and reproduce life. The second thing it's going to argue is that it's consistent. You see the pattern of consonance everywhere. Not just once or twice, but in everywhere and in every part of creation. Okay? Now, here's where we get into, pardon my terrible drawings I tried. Okay? So, let's look at this first part here. We're going to argue consonance. Okay? From the teleological argument, the first part it argues is consonance. Here's the question we have to ask ourselves. When you look at creation, do you see complexity in this design? Yeah. Nobody would disagree with that. Okay? Nobody would disagree with that. Second thing we have to ask, and this is the big one here, do you see order? Do we see order? Or do you see chaos? Which one do we see? Order, that's right. When you look at creation, do you see function? Nobody would disagree with these things. When you look at creation, do you see purpose? Do you see the goal? Do you see end? Do you see the telos? Let's look at this, okay? Let's look at this idea of consonance, right? Of complexity, order, function, and purpose. Complex design. Let's look at it from a micro level, and let's look at it from a macro level, okay? This is a human cell, or what was supposed to be one, okay? Let's take a human cell. This is on the micro level, okay? For those who've studied medicine, you're welcome, okay? Let's look at a cell. When you look inside a cell, when you look inside a human cell, do you see complexity? Again, there's not a biologist in the world that would disagree with you. You see complexity, okay? No doubt about that. Here's the next big one. Do you see order or do you see chaos? Well, let's take a look at it. We have functions for everything, okay? Does the ribosome work perfectly with the rough endoplasmic reticulum? Yeah, it certainly does. These operate together. What do they produce, Melissa? Proteins. Okay? So these two are in order with each other. What is this, what does the nucleus have to do with the plasma? How do those two relate to each other? When you have the outer coating of this plasma membrane, does it work in conjunction with the nucleus or against it? We're in conjunction with it. So we see order. There's no chaos in here. We see that in consonance, every piece works together as with what? Function together in order to create, with order, by the way, in order to what? Create, to sustain, and reproduce what? Life. Okay? So when you look at all these pieces, if you say that when I look into a human cell, I see no function and order, that's willful act of disobedience, just to logic. Because what happens with the lysosome? What happens, let's just say this. What if you have no lysosome?
It all breaks down.
The entire thing breaks down, right? What happens, what if you have no, let's say, nucleus? What does a nucleus do? Yeah, that's right. This houses DNA, right? What else does this do? This is the engine of the entire cell. This is what tells the cell to reproduce. It tells it to divide. It tells it to create DNA. It drives all these functions. What happens if you don't have mitochondria? What happens without it? Nothing. What creates 95% of cell energy? Mitochondria. What happens if you don't have that? What can be sustained? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So not only do we see complexity, not only do we see order, everything functions with each other. Without the rough endoplasmic reticulum, without the ribosomes, they can't operate together. You have no protein, you have nothing. Not only do you have order, within that complex order, within that complex design, what do we have? Function. Everything functions with a purpose. And what is this purpose? What is the goal? What does the end means? What does the telos from a microscopic level? Creates, right? Develops, sustains, and it maintains life. It reproduces it. Nobody would disagree with this, right? No scientist would ever say nothing's important. It's all required for life, okay? Now let's look at it from a macro level, okay? This is the earth. Poor drawing of it, okay? This is earth. Now, for those who don't know, there's about four layers, what do they call it, Lily? Layers, right? 4 layers to the earth. We have the crust, we have the mantle, we have the outer core, and we have the inner core. Can earth sustain life without all 4 of these? No. I had to look this up because I don't know much about the earth's makeup. Here's what I can tell you. Geology makes it very, very clear. The inner core is what maintains our magnetic field, okay? Without the magnetic field, we have no atmosphere, right? Without no atmosphere, can life be sustained on Earth? No. We would all die. It's impossible to sustain Earth without that inner core. There's many other things, but this is one that stuck out to me. This outer core is what helps produce. This maintains the magnetic field. This produces the magnetic field that sustains our atmosphere, which sustains life. The mantle. Without the mantle, we have no nutrients in our soils, right? We have no tectonic plate activity, which rotates carbon and some things that I don't quite understand, but it's important. We can't have life without it. It's impossible. And we know the importance of the crust. What do we live on? The crust. What is our food source? It's what comes from the crust, right? What makes life habitable on Earth is the crust. Can Earth exist without all of these? No, it's not possible, right? It's impossible. So not only, here's the best part, not only is our Earth perfectly situated inwardly, it's perfectly situated what? Outwardly. Go ahead, Zion, you can say it. You're right. It's outwardly. Not only is it situated perfectly inwardly, not only is the internal components of it able to sustain life, what about outwardly? Where is it positioned in relation to the sun? What if it's relatively closer? What happens? Can we survive? No. What if it's relatively a little farther away? It's too hot, too cold, right? So the Earth just happens to be placed externally in such a way that life can be sustained on it for us. If it's too close, too hot. If it's too far away, too cold. Life cannot be sustained on it. Inwardly, same thing. So when we look at these from both a micro level and from a macro level, you can see that the exact same complex design exists, right? You can see that the exact same order within that complexity exists. Nobody would disagree. No scientist disagrees. No atheist would disagree. But also we can see that within that design and that order, we see what? Function. We said everything has its functional piece. Nothing operates outside of its function. Okay, that's important to remember. Nothing operates outside of its ability. Okay? And not only do we see the function, we see that all three of these things put together are driven towards what? Purpose. They're driven towards an end goal. They're driven towards a telos. Does that make sense? Questions on that? As we move on. Questions on that? So the question, yeah, Ben, go ahead.
Well, my line with this is I've actually argued this type of teleological argument with an atheist, and they usually argue, well, we're just a 1 in a billion chance. And the universe is infinite, so what's stopping us from not existing? It could be others like us, but because
Sure.
there's so infinite chances, well, it could exist, sure.
And you're exactly right, because we're going to get to that. You're exactly right. That's that next part. So what Ben is talking about is their argument is chance, right? This is what their argument is, which is a perfect segue into this part. What is the most logical view? Because I'm going to pose an illustration to you. So when we look at all these things, okay, we see all this exist on a micro level. We see all this exist on a macro level. We could go smaller and we could go bigger, by the way. But they all exist with this. I'm going to pose an illustration to you. What is more logical, okay? Let's say you are walking and you're in a field. You're walking along a road, dirt road. And you happen to see a rock on the ground, okay? You probably wouldn't think very much of a rock, right? You would expect something like that to be walking along your dirt road. But then let's say, as you're walking, you walk up and you see a watch, okay? This is the analogy of the watchmaker, okay? Many probably have heard of it. So you're walking on this path and you look down and you see a watch. You see a Rolex. And you pick up the watch, okay? And you open up the back of the watch, and what do you see in the back of a watch? You see 30, 40, 50 gears, some big, some small, right? And you notice when you look at the watch, you see, unless you really know watches, it's kind of an overwhelming thing to see, right? You see all the complex designs of each gear. Every tooth has a purpose. Every groove has a purpose. Every screw has a purpose, right? And you look at the complex design of this watch. You see these 30, 40, 50 gears really working in this watch, okay? But as you look at the watch, it doesn't stop there. As you see the design of the watch, you see how complex everything is. It doesn't stop there, because when you look at every gear, you see the big gear working with what? Another big gear, and you see a big gear working with a small gear, and they're all working in what? Order. So when you look at this watch so far, do you see chaos and dysfunction, or do you see order and function? So you see that even within the complex design of every single gear, every tooth and every groove of the gear, you see that they're all placed in order. And within that complex order, what are they doing? They're all functioning as a unit. They all have consonance with each other, okay?
Not only that, but they're all synchronized with the sun and the moon cycles.
So you see, to his point, you see complex order, complex design. You see order of all the parts. They're all working together. And you see that they all function. But it doesn't stop there. Because when you look at the back of the watch and you see the complex design and everything is functioning in order, in harmony, in consonance with each other as one unit, what are they also all functioning for? A purpose. They're all functioning towards the end goal, the telos, which is what? Because when you flip the watch over, what do you see? You see the time being told on the other side. Okay? So you get the idea. You see where this illustration goes. Now, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, going back on what Ben was saying about chance. I guess you could argue that all of these things could exist if you have a bazillion lifetimes to make it happen, you know, if we're talking about chance. But the one thing that chance does not allow for is purpose, because that's
Yes.
and motive and forethought and all of that.
Because I'm going to give you a statistic here in just a few minutes. But we're going to answer the question. So when you took the back of the watch and you see all this complex order and function, it all has a purpose. Remember, this doesn't function chaotically. How do we know? Because when you turn the watch around, what's it doing? Nothing? No, there's a purpose to it. What's that purpose? It's to tell time. So you have all the elements here in this watch. Now, to your point and to Ben's point, let's ask the question. What is the most logical thing? Not true yet. We haven't established that. We're arguing from reason and logic. What is the most logical response, the most logical deduction? Do we believe that this all happened by chance? Or do we believe that there's an intelligent designer? Who holds the more rational? Is there anybody that would say that it's more rational to believe that chance is the causal power? Remember, what's chance? Chance is just a mathematical calculation. Does chance have physical being? No. Does addition have physical being? No. It's a mathematical principle. So could chance be the causal power of an effect? No. Why? Because chance has nothing in and of itself. It has no being. But to go along with that argument, is it possible? Let's argue yes. Let's say yes. We'll give it to them. But we're not arguing truth yet. We're arguing logic and reason, because that's where we all have to start. Is it more reasonable to believe that an intelligent designer created creation, or that chance created creation with a purpose, complexity, order, and function? Let's keep going. Any questions on the first part? Any questions at all that we want to add to? So we can see all consonants on a macro and a micro level.
So with the watch analogy, I was saying back to what you had mentioned with the whole chance that this could be happening. I would ask the same question with the watch. If you're walking down the road and you see the watch and you pick it up, is it more
Logical
to say somebody made this watch? I would throw that same thing at them if they asked that question, you know.
And what we established a couple weeks ago when you weren't here yet is this. The one prerequisite to the classical apologetic approach is not the assumption of God. That's not the one requisite. It's the assumption that you have fidelity to what? Reason, logic. This is why we start where we start, because nobody would disagree with this. Nobody. That's honest, right? That has fealty to reason. Nobody would disagree with this. Not an atheist, nobody. Just like the cosmological argument last week. We start on neutral ground and we build our case for theism up. And we're saying any atheist would say, yeah, I see all these things in a human cell. I see all these things in macro levels. So we start there. Okay, let's start there. We ask them, what's the most logical? If they say that chance created this next part's for them. Because this is the first part of the teleological argument argues from, is everything in creation has consonants. It has complex order. Within that order is function. Within that function, everything is driven to a purpose, an end goal. Go ahead, Ben.
Another thing that they say, I've argued this too, which I'm glad I'm able to put my experience with their debates over here, is well, there's chance and there's chaos and all stuff, but that's how the universe began, is it was chaotic at first. And I was like, okay, well then how did everything end up with
So the argument then would be,
and they said, well, every time we throw things, or let's say nature or dirt or sand, what does it do? And their answer is evolution. Well, evolution refined it also from movements, and nature started slowly comprehending things and making order out of things.
So in their argument, what is the causal power from going to chaos to order? There's got to be a causal power. It can't be itself, right? So this is why that first part thrashes that argument. So it argues from consonants, right? We've established this. Everything on a micro level and a macro level has purpose, driven, function. Second part is consistency. This is the big one. This is the big one. So when you look at the intricacy of design, of all creation, let's take the micro level, okay? When you look at it, you see it's complex design. You see it all orders. It's all order. It doesn't function in chaos. It functions in order with itself, okay? And each part of the function in this order, there's purpose. This cell, it develops, it sustains, and what? Reproduces life, all within itself here, okay? This is what it does. Now, here's the question. If we look at one cell under a microscope, we see all these things, okay? Let's say we look at another cell, a different cell right next to it. What do we see? Same thing. That's exactly right. We see the same thing. Let's say we look at another cell. What do we see? Same thing. And any difference? Let's say we look at a muscle cell instead of a brain cell. What do we see? Same thing. What if we look at a liver cell? What do we see? Same thing. Next cell, next cell, next cell. What is that called? Consistency. So when we look at one cell, we see that within that one cell, we have all this. But if we look at a whole bunch of cells, what do we have? A pattern. What do we have a pattern of? It's reproducibility. We can reproduce the complex design, the order, the function, and the purpose consistently, not one time. Now, to those who have chance, I looked this up. I had to Google this because I didn't know the answer to this. I asked the question, what are the statistical chances, the statistical probability that one cell can create itself and have all these things? The answer was, it said conservatively 1 times 10 to the 74th power. One cell. Okay? So the chances that this cell does all these things in its own creation is 1 times 10 to the 74th power. Now, each person has an average of 37 trillion cells. And how many people are on this earth? 8.3 billion. So what are the chances, to their argument, statistically, that 37 trillion times 8.3 billion times 1 times 10 to the 74th power can do all these things on its own? That is the mathematical probability that all these cells in every human being can demonstrate all these things with consistency. So, I go back. What is the most logical reason for all these things? What is the most reasonable thing? Because when you look at all these things, we don't see one cell. We see consistently across all levels of creation. Think in your head right now. Everything in creation, is there anything in creation that you can think of that does not demonstrate these two things? You can go even smaller, like I said, or even bigger. Look at the way the universe exists. The solar systems exist, right? When you look at the solar system, do you see order or chaos? Well, if you see chaos, we got a problem, right? We see order. At every level of creation, we see this, but we also see that it has consistent patterns. These patterns are reproducible in many cells, all the cells that we see. And here's the important part. Are they consistent in their purpose? It's another big one. Do we see this? Do we see when we look at every cell that they are consistent in what they reproduce, and are they consistent in their purpose? Could anybody disagree with this from a reasonable perspective, a logical perspective? No, you can't. So with these two things, when we look at it, what do we see? Consonance and consistency must logically lead to what? Creator. Is there any way, logically, and I pose the question, that this is not supported to logically and far more logically, by the way, even statistically speaking, to believe that an intelligent designer, an intelligent creator, is the one that created the consistency and the consonance of purpose in all of creation?
You haven't even addressed differentiation yet.
Oh, that's right. Questions on this? This is the heart of the teleological argument. This is what it's arguing, is when you look at creation. Should we go back to it? When you look at creation, this is what the teleological argument says. The order, the complexity, and the purpose-directedness seen in the universe logically points us to, right? Logically, this is the only reasonable response to the existence of an intelligent designer, that the purposeful order, which we established, right? All creation has functions for a purpose. Does a cell nucleus do anything other than what it's designed to do? No. Can it? No. What is the driver behind that? Is it chance? But remember, every effect requires what? A cause, right? So can chance be a causal power? If you say yes, we got a problem. You're now being illogical. So we know chance can't be it. Not by a religious statement, right? Not by a biblical statement, but by the laws of existence, of creation says it can't. Not only do we see purposeful order, we see what? The consistent working order. If I looked at your cells and your cells and your cells and mine, what do we see? Consistent working order across the spectrum. Not only do we see the consistent working order, we see its structures, and all these things are best explained. I put this here for a reason. Because they argue chance. 1 times 10 to the 74th times 34 trillion times 8.3 billion. Do the math. What is the best explanation? Is that the existence of an intelligent creator created this rather than chance. So in our argument for theism, remember, we're establishing theism here using natural theology. When we look at the cosmological argument argues the how of creation. And what's the how here? A causal creator, right? We talked about this last week. And we know that when we look at the cosmological argument from contingency and causality, we have deduced logically that the someone or something that caused existence to exist must be necessary. Whoever this is the someone that caused existence. That someone is necessary. We argued this last week. That other person also has to be eternal. Why? Because he has to precede what? All effects. Therefore, he has to be the first cause. He has to be eternal. He has to be uncaused because he's not an effect. He has to be self-existent as the cause, and he has to be independent of creation. But what can we now add to the nature of this someone who caused existence? He has to be what? He has to be intelligent. He has to be. Because if he isn't, then all of creation falls apart. We've just established the claim. Everything in creation has a complex design. Within that complex design is working order. Within that working order is a function, and everything functions together in harmony with consonance for a purpose. And we don't see that once. We see that in all things. We see consistency. So we know that the nature of this theism is the someone who caused creation to exist, now we know has to be intelligent. Next week, we're going to argue for the moral law, because you're going to find out very quickly that this someone must also be a what? A moral being. Do we have any questions so far on the cosmological? And by the way, the cosmological is the how, right? We talked about the causal power, right? It's the causal cause. The teleological argues the why. Why was creation created? It was created for what? A purpose. It was created for a goal. And we've already established that, again, not a biblical claim, not a religious claim. Anybody would say creation has a purpose. Everything functions with a purpose. Well, the teleological argument argues the why. Why was it created? There's no chaos. It was created with purpose. So that's how we know that our being must be an intelligent being. Questions as we close?
Would you say once you move from theism to God and then end up Christianity, that once you end up there, would you rephrase natural theology as general revelation?
Yes. So this is why I put this part here. So what Steve is he's just moving ahead, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. So yes. So what we're doing is sort of the logical argument from this side of our stance here. As I said earlier, we're arguing theism. We're not arguing God yet, and we're certainly not arguing Christianity yet. Remember in the very beginning, the very first class, there was the classical apologetic approach, the presuppositional apologetic approach, and the evidentiary apologetic approach. They're all true. None of them are wrong. Not one approach is better than the other. But where classical approach differs is we don't presuppose the existence of God. The presuppositional approach kind of starts right in here, okay? They just assume God exists, and they just assume the Christian God exists. All true, by the way. Nothing wrong with that. Classical apologetics goes back a step further. We're going to establish theism first. Then we're going to argue which God, okay? Because we have to first, imagine arguing with an atheist. You're going to show that the most logical deduction of when you look at creation, the most logical deduction is there is an existence of God. It's illogical not to believe that, right? Paul says that in Romans 1:19. Okay, we established that last week. Once we move on, which is next week, we're going to talk about the moral argument. Okay, so we're going to say that we know that this being also has to be moral. So we're going to take all this information that we've deduced from natural theology, and now we're going to apply it to the existence of God. The next question is, which God? Is it the Mormon God? The Christian God? The Buddhist God? Right? The Islam God? There's many gods out there. Which one is the right one? Now we get to look at the evidence. Right? And what Steve's talking about is general versus specific revelation, which we're going to get into. But for right now, yes, to answer your question, we haven't established which God yet, which we'll be doing after our moral argument. And we're going to show that the only logical deduction and reasonable belief is in the Christian God. Why? We'll look at the evidence. That's when we get into the evidentiary part. Good question. Anybody else? Questions?
Yeah. So when you think about making the argument from complexity, and you say that chance cannot produce complexity, which I totally agree with.
Yep.
What the atheist is going to say, what the non-theist is going to say, I'm not arguing from complexity, I'm arguing from simplicity to complexity.
Okay.
So I'm not saying, bam, there was a watch. I'm saying, bam, there was a pendulum.
Yep. And it evolved,
And it-
kind of to Ben's point, right?
And then you get another cog and another cog.
That's
and
right.
another cog. So the statistical chances go down. That's what they're going to say.
That's right. And that's not an unfair argument. I understand exactly what they're saying. There's a reason why the argument in classical theology starts where? This is the foundation of the entire argument of classical apologetics. Because to your point, is they argue from simplicity to complexity. Fine, we'll take that. But you still can't get around the fact that within that beginning with simplicity, ending in complexity, you still can't get around the fact that within all of that, even simplicity, still exists this.
Yes.
Okay?
Even a pendulum.
Even a pendulum.
Even a pendulum has a purpose.
That's right.
You still have to assemble the watch.
So you still have to assemble. It's exactly
See
right.
the mathematical knowledge before, you see they talk about taking all the watch parts and the spring and everything, putting it in the back and shaking it. How many years do you have to shake that before all the parts land together and the screws tighten and everything comes together and it's a functioning watch?
Excellent point.
So there's nothing particularly incoherent about simplicity to complexity.
Not at all.
The development of a baby in the womb goes from
Simple.
simple to complex.
Yep, mhm.
So there's nothing inherently incoherent about that. The incoherency comes in when, even in its simplest iteration, it still has complexity. I suppose.
But it also still has
Order, function.
function and purpose. Why? Because what is the end goal of simplicity? Complexity. But let's go back even further. What does every effect require? Doesn't matter if you start from simplicity, that simple design still is what? Contingent. Contingent upon what? A causal power. This is why this is the base. And again, this isn't religious claims. These are the physical laws that govern creation. You can't have a fetus without what? A cause. You need a sperm and an egg. You can't have those without that. Okay? Logically speaking.
Plus with a cell, all its parts are living. And the one part cannot live without the other. So the argument that it takes many, many years or billions of years or even 100 years, how long would those individual parts have to live and find each other and plug in together and work and keep functioning to sustain it? And that goes entirely against the whole idea of evolution. With a watch, all those individual parts that would evolve and the cogs and springs and so forth would all have to continue living separately for however many years. They have to find each other and still keep living and then plug into each other and still keep living and then figure out how to multiply. So it's ridiculous.
Well, let's go back to your analogy of all the springs and the components of the watch in a bag. You shake the bag. Your argument was, how long do you have to shake until all those pieces form themselves to function and to arrive at its purpose, right? But let's take that same bag analogy and let's do it 37 trillion times. And what are the odds that you consistently get that? That's impossible. Shane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's impossible. There's no evidence. We have evidence of a single-celled organism that has purpose.
That's right.
And then there's everything else that's extremely complex. Where is the evidence in fossil records, creation at any point, that we got to 4 cells and then we quit? And then eventually we drove forward.
Amen.
There's zero evidence.
So when we argue logic, just on that point, what is the most logical belief? The most logical belief is that there's an intelligent design. There has to be. Because if not, we're quite literally causing or saying that the causal power of creation is a mathematical statistic. That's impossible. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's beyond absurd because, I mean, even if you start with a zygote, you start with a cell. How does the cell know to multiply the way it does and then to sprout off the correct number of legs and the correct number of arms and the correct number of fingers? How does it know how many eyes to put and where and to line them up together to form? It's just absolutely absurd.
That's one cell.
They don't even know how to do that.
And what are the odds that it does it what? Consistently. You can't make... This is why when we talked about last week, if you believe that creation doesn't exist, obviously you are absurd, right? That's absurd. If you believe that creation is uncaused, that self-existent, that the effects of creation have no cause, you've just violated the laws that govern our world, our existence, right? Our universe. If you believe, I believe it's caused, but it's caused from nothing, it created itself. That's absurd. We've just violated the law of causality, as we talked about last week. But when you get here and you say, well, I'm arguing from simplicity. I like that because I've heard that argument many times. Fine. I'll give you the simplicity. But you still can't answer what's the causal power, not only of the simplicity, but what's the causal power of its progression? How is it that it goes from simplicity to complexity with consistency? What's driving it? Is it driving itself? Well, if it's driving itself, where did that get that ability to do that? Where does creation get the ability to arrive at its purpose? Not once, but consistently.
Yeah, and that's something else too, when you think through all these things. And so you have the atheist position, simplicity, complexity. You also have certainly many Christians who want to say statistics, chance is the tool wielded by God to produce the end product.
Okay.
Right, I'm sure you've heard that. Right?
So who are they acknowledging is still the causal power?
Yeah, they're acknowledging God.
God. So however that argument goes for them, fine. But you still have to know that the causal power is ultimately whoever this theism is who's going to be God, right?
So at this point, somebody who is a theist who also believes in evolution is, you think, incoherent, but not.
Haven't gotten there yet. We're going to get there once we get to this part. Once we get to this part, we've established theism, then we're going to get into that particular part. Go ahead, Ben.
They actually do believe in an infinite force that was before the Big Bang, is that there's particles in the void that did exist and are in fact infinite. What these particles are, they do not know exactly. It could be energy, it could be an invisible force, but it's definitely not a God, because that's illogical that a living thing could even exist or live in nothingness and in the infinite void. Christians are ridiculous than the usual. No.
So just so I understand their argument, is they believe that there are effects without what? Cause. And Peyton said something last week that was great. He said, I'm shocked. I'm paraphrasing. He said, I'm shocked to see that the physicists that so vehemently adhere to the physical laws, these physicists, they vehemently stick to these physical laws that govern creation, but they're so quick to abandon them when it comes to this. You're irrational.
The very particles you talk about on the smallest level, like atoms, things like that, when you talk about carbons and nitrogens, they adhere to specific laws on their own. You can't have things, otherwise they will completely.
So Melissa's arguing that within the complex design, is there obedience within that design? Do they all follow the same physical laws, but do they do it once? Or do they do it consistently? They do it consistent. That's the key here. They do it consistently. Good point. Anybody else?
So the Lord argues against the infinite thing, because guess what atoms and cells and all that stuff does? They can rot away. They can someday disappear and replace with new ones. So how can they be infinite?
That's right. That's why we argued last week that if you're going to sustain creation, you must be what? Outside of creation. Because creation cannot sustain itself, right? How do we know? Does creation come into being and leave its being? Does people come into birth and death? Yes, right? So in order to maintain creation, in order to create it, you have to be outside of creation. Because it's illogical to believe that you can create yourself. So you have to be outside of creation. Anybody else? As we close.
You know, when they violate the laws they claim to believe in, they're demonstrating they're every bit as religious as everyone else. It's all religion.
I think it was Dave that said, I think it was you, that made a good point. I think it was you that said, it takes a lot more faith to be an atheist. And there's a lot of truth to that. But here's the argument. Here's the disparity. And this is why that particular saying is right. It just doesn't capture the whole thing, because to an atheist, their faith is what? Their faith is not backed by logic and reason. Their faith is irrational.
The blind faith.
They're blind. That's exactly right. Their faith is a blind faith. Do they actually have faith? No, because what does the Bible say faith is? In the book of Hebrews. Anybody know? Hebrews 11. Substance. That's right. The Christian faith is a faith of substance, not irrationality and not blind faith. There is substance to our faith. There is something behind it. There is a structure to it. There is an order to it. There is all these things to the Christian faith. So to an atheist, someone who believes in atheism, do they have faith? No, what they have is irrationality. We have faith. Why? Because our faith is of substance and it's of logic. And again, I have to point this out. I'm going to say this 1,000,000 times. Everything we are arguing here is not a biblical argument. And it's not a religious argument. It's what? It is a physical creation governed by its laws argument. We are starting on neutral ground with these people. Everything we've said so far, is there anything that these people could rationally deny? anything? No. That's why we've started to build our case here. We didn't start here. We started on that neutral ground.
Sanity versus insanity.
That's really what it comes down to. That's to be fair. And this is, again, we covered this last week. In Romans 1:19 and 20, why does Paul say, on your day of judgment, what is the one thing you can't claim on your day of judgment? What does Paul say? I didn't know. Right? No one told me. Why? Because the knowledge of God is so obvious here that you are without excuse on your day of judgment, because we learned this in the book of Acts, that when Paul was reasoning with them, remember we covered this? Paul was appealing to their reason. And the existence of God is so reasonably known, the only reason you reject him is because it's a willful, purposeful rejection. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Light had to do with dark.
That's right.
I can't understand the absurdity of it because they're in darkness, they are of darkness.
So we argue. We talked about this last week. 2 weeks ago, what is our purpose in this right here? Are we trying to win an argument? Are we trying to win them over to Jesus? Well, no, because we don't have that ability, right? Who has to change the heart?
Jesus.
To the Holy Spirit. That's exactly right. God has to do that. Our job, what does 1 Peter say? Our job is to put them what? To shame when they deny the rational. We put them to shame when we say, look at creation. How can you logically reject God? They're going to say, well, I can't. That's the only deduction here. The only deduction that they have here is I'm denying God out of willful purpose, despite the evidence. Anybody else? Shane, please.
Lord, we thank you this morning, this great discussion. And I personally thank you for your command, your direction to defend your faith, your moral law, your creation for your glory.
Mm-hmm.
I pray that you keep our ears open, our studies well, to always be ready, as you commanded, to defend your glory at a moment's notice. In Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, guys, next week is the moral argument. Don't miss this one, please.